All right, let's make a blog using Brut, a new web framework for Ruby. You can use mkbrut, which will make a new app for you, and it's available as a Docker image or as a Ruby gem. So let's create my blog, which will be called Dave's Exciting Information. That sounds like a pretty good name for a blog, although it is kind of long and a lot to type. I don't want to have to type all that out, so let's see if we can maybe shorten that up a little bit. How about we just call it DEI? Cool. Okay, so now we're going to build a Docker image in which all of Brut's development is going to happen. We'll sort of copy some stuff that we'll need for VI, and then we'll start everything up. So this will start the image we just built and start Postgres, and also run an OpenTelemetry viewer that we'll see a little bit later. So we've got our basic app done. So we're going to use dxexec to run bash. And so that's going to kind of log into our development server. We'll run bin setup, which mkbrut created for us. And that's going to install all of the gems that we need, all of the node modules. Is also going to set up Ruby LSP, set up our database server, download Chromium, which we'll be using for our end-to-end test, and just sort of get everything that we need set up. Cool. So now we can use bin dev to start the server up and see what we've got. We should have some sort of basic page running on 6502, and we do. Cool. Now, before we get too far along, let's run tests. So there's a little bit of code in our new app, and so we should make sure the tests work because we're going to be writing some more code, and we're going to want these tests to kind of stay working. So we can run some unit tests. There's an example custom element test, and then there's an end-to-end test. So there's just a little bit there so that you have something to work from, and those look good. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and open up our editor, which of course is VI, and look at the home page. The home page class generates the home page. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So let's delete all this stuff that was there from mkbrut. We don't need that. We're going to make our own home page for the blog, and we'll just paste in some stuff. Now this is using Flex. So Flex has a method for every HTML element. Hopefully it looks pretty obvious as to what it's doing here, but it's all Ruby code, so that's kind of nice. And we'll start up our dev server. We'll go back and check out the home page, and it should be pretty boring. Cool. But we have somewhere to work. Now, before we get too far into building any databases or things like that, let's kind of clean this up a little bit with some CSS. So index CSS is where all of our CSS happens. You can see we're importing a node module, we're importing a file. But for this, I'm not going to use any kind of framework. We'll just do it old school and just use regular CSS. So we'll just paste that in there, save that, reload the server, and cool, slightly better. I mean, I've seen worse. So with that out of the way, we want to make a few more pages and forms. So we need a page where we can edit our blog posts, and we need a form to submit new blog posts to the server so they get handled and saved. So we'll use the scaffold command to make a page to handle the blog post editor URL. That class will be called blog post editor page, and then we will make a form to be submitted to the new blog post URL, and that will be called the new blog post form, handled by the new blog post handler. So we can see it added a couple pages there in our routing section, not a big deal. So let's look at the home page. So we've got this href that goes nowhere, so that's going to go to the page we just created, the blog post editor page. And every page has a routing method that tells you what the URL is, so you don't have to hard code URLs or remember any kind of magic methods, just there on the class, which is nice. So we'll start the server up again. We'll click that link, and it takes us to a basic page that was created by the scaffold command. So let's go check that page out. So it has an initializer, and it's got a page template method, which will generate the HTML. So this page edits a form, so we want to be able to give it a partially filled in form or not anything at all. So if we get a form, we use it. If we don't, we will create one that's empty using the new blog post form class that was created by the scaffolding. Our template, we'll just sort of outline a little bit of what we're going to do. We need to have a form. It's going to be surrounded by this custom element called Brut form, which will handle some UX around client-side validations. We'll have some labels and a button, and we'll need to fill those in a second. But rather than just type in a bunch of HTML, we can define our form, our new blog post form. We can define the method or the inputs and elements that are going to be in that form and use that to generate our HTML. So our blog post form is going to let us provide a title and some content. And our title has to be at least 3 characters long. Of note, both of these values are required by default. That's a good default, so that's why it's the default. But you can change it if you want. So now we'll go back to the blog post editor page, and we can use that form to generate the HTML so that it will be named appropriately. It will have the right values in it if we're in the middle of sort of validations and all of that stuff. It can also generate constraint validation messages for us. So these are flex components that Brut provides that will generate the HTML that we want. And that's hopefully pretty obvious, but it just takes care of everything that we need. So this is for the title input, and then we'll do another one for the content. That one we'll use a text area instead of a text field. And you'll notice we're calling T, so that's getting our localized messaging. So we're gonna go ahead and use that for the form, so we have localization, kind of from the start. It's a lot easier to add then. Now, if we reload, of course, we haven't defined what the actual translations are, and it's telling us what keys it's expecting. So we'll go into a Ruby file, which is basically a giant hash here of all of our localization keys. So pages, blog post editor page, and it's looking like form.title, form.content, form.post. So we'll paste in some values there. And then when we reload the page, it works. Look at all the YAML that I wasn't writing. Pretty nice. We submit the form, we can see client-side validations are happening, messaging is getting inserted. That's what the Brut form custom element is doing. So the UX isn't great, but it's there and we can make it look nicer. So let's do that. Let's make it look nicer. We'll go back to our HTML or not our HTML, our CSS, and add some stuff in there. So again, we're going to stick with regular CSS. This is a big wall of stuff, but one thing that's important to note is it's all inside this blog post editor class. Now, if we look at the default layout, all pages are surrounded with this. We look at the body tag. The body tag has a class name of the page name. So we can use that to scope classes if we want. You don't have to do that, but we're going to do that. Now, Brut CV is a custom element that's used to manage the constraint violations that we saw before. So we're going to style those in a certain way. And if we reload the page, it looks slightly nicer, and we trigger the client-side validations, you can see messages that we control are in there, and that's kind of nice. Cool. Now, let's try to fill this out and see what happens. Okay, we need to implement our handler. The handler is what is used to process the submission of a form, and our handler is given an instance of our form class with the data filled in, whatever data was submitted is in there, and then the handle method will figure out what to do with it. So in our case, we want to recheck the client-side validations. If someone skips JavaScript or submitted without it, we don't want to proceed. But if the form is valid, then we want to check our server-side validation. So in our case, we want our blog post to have at least 5 words in it, so we check that. If there's a problem, we set a server-side constraint violation, and we re-render the blog post editor page. Otherwise, we save it, go to the home page. So we resend it, and now, again, we're missing some translations. Not a problem. We know where those go into a nice, awesome Ruby file, no YAML in sight. So up here you can see we've got EN for English, CV for constraint violations, client side, server side. So this is a server side one. We'll put it in there. Not enough words. And you can see there's interpolation. We reload, resend, and now it shows up. And it looks the same as our client side validation. So there's a unification of the UX there that you can use if you want. You don't have to, but it makes things easier if you do. So now we'll post our blog post, and well, we got to the home page. We haven't actually saved anything yet. So we're going to need a database table to do that, and we can create that via the db model scaffold command. And so that will accept the model name, and it will create a shell of all the files that we need to deal with. So that's like a db model to access it, a factory to make test data, and a migration. So let's go ahead and call it blog post. And let's check out the migration that it made. So Brut uses the SQL library. So this is a SQL migration. You can use all of the stuff that it provides. Brut really only wants you to do an up migration. We don't really do down migration. So we will find the table, give it a comment. It has an externalized ID. We'll see that later, but that's a unique key that we can share that isn't used for referential integrity. Also note that all columns are not null by default, because null is a terrible default. So why would that be the default? It wouldn't be. But you can make things null if you need them to be. Here's the class. Again, this is a SQL model class that has access. We changed the prefix for our external ID to something that's a little bit more of a mnemonic. And then our factory is what we'll use to make seed data for development and test data for tests. And this is using FactoryBot, and Faker is installed, so we can use that to create realistic-ish looking test data and not just the same thing over and over again. Randomized test data also kind of keeps us honest when we're writing tests. So db migrate applies the migrations to dev-e test applies them to the test database, and we should be ready to go. Now there is a spec that tests all of our factories. It's important that the factories work without other factories having to be run first. So let's test that, and our factory works, meaning we can create it without any errors from the database. Now let's use the factory that we just made to make some data for development. So that happens in our seed data, and we'll just 10 times create a blog post. Again, this is using FactoryBot, so it should be familiar to you if you've used that in a Rails app before. DB seed will load it. Cool. So now we can start our dev server, go to our home page, and, well, we're not showing the blog post yet, but now we have some. So let's go to the home page. Now this is just Ruby, right? So we can just make a call to the DB blog post model that we saw earlier, and that is a SQL model. So there's a whole rich active record-like API. It's not exactly like active record, but it's very similar. So we will get them all based on created date and put the title at a H2, split up the paragraphs so we have paragraphs of our content, and voila, we now have a reasonable looking blog. All right, cool. So all we need to do is let our blog post editor actually save blog posts, and that happens in the handler. So we'll replace this to do with a call to the DB blog post model. Again, this is SQL, pretty standard, so you can just call the create method on the class, give it a bunch of keyword arguments, and it will save it. And now if we go back and write a blog post, we should see it show up on our homepage. New awesome blog post. This is a new post. Can you feel the emblogination? Definitely a word. We'll add spell check in a future video. So now that it's posted, we can see it shows up. Sweet. Now, remember those tests that we didn't write? Well, we should probably write those. So if we stop our server and run bin test, it will run our unit tests, and we can see a lot of them are failing. Some of them are generated by by scaffolding. Some of them are just wrong because we broke something. So let's go in and start fixing things. Let's start with a handler. That's the core of our logic. So we'll get rid of the fake test that the scaffold made, and we'll put in 3 test cases. So the first one is going to be testing the client-side validations. If they got submitted, we still want to fail, and we don't want to save anything. We want to regenerate the blog post editor page's HTML with appropriate error messages. So that's what this will test. Now, if those are satisfied, but we don't have a post that is long enough, not enough words, we want to test that in fact is checked and that we don't make a new one, that we do regenerate the HTML of the blog post editor page. And then our third test is going to be that we got everything right and it's saved to the database. You'll notice this is all RSpec. Brut uses RSpec. A lot of people use RSpec. I like RSpec, so that's what Brut uses. And it works pretty well. You don't have to use every feature of RSpec. I don't, but you can. Nothing's stopping you. So let's run the test. Bin test run takes the file, and it looks good. Cool. Now let's look at our homepage, because the homepage has got to show all of the blog posts. So we want to basically create a bunch of blog posts and then assert that they showed up. We don't want to just assert that their content is randomly on the page. We want to make sure that those actual posts are there, and that's where this external ID comes in. You'll see that we're checking that the article has an ID of our blog post externalized ID. Now we didn't put that in the markup, so when we run the test, we will get a big nasty failure. And if we scroll up through all the content, we'll see what it's expecting. And that's what an external ID looks like. It's got a little prefix and then a unique value for each blog post. So we'll add that with the ID attribute and rerun the test, and we should be good to go. And we are. Great. Now, the blog post editor page, it doesn't really do much, and we're going to write an end-to-end test that will test it. So we don't need to write a test for it, but we would like to record the fact that we thought through should or should we not write a test. So a way to do that is to use this method called implementation is covered by other tests. So that basically lets you sort of document explicitly that, yes, this is tested, there's coverage, it's just not here. So let's add that coverage in an end-to-end test. This uses Playwright, which is similar to Capybara, but not exactly. and we'll basically just kind of walk through the workflow, right? We'll create a client-side validation problem, we'll create a server-side validation problem, and then we'll save a blog post and make sure that that whole thing kind of works. So we'll use all of the APIs that Brut provides, routings, go to places, locating form fields based on CSS selectors, clicking them, interacting with them. This is all from the Playwright API pretty much. And once we have a real blog post that satisfies all of the server-side constraints, we should be able to see it show up on the page. So let's run our end-to-end test and see if that's in fact true. Bin test E to E should run it. Starts up a server in test mode, runs a test, and we're all good. Nice. So let's run that bin CI command that we ran at the very beginning. That's going to test every single thing. All of our unit tests, all of our end-to-end tests, the example custom element tests, and it's also going to do a bundle audit to make sure that we're not running against anything that has violations. It would also check if every class has a test, so all of our classes do, so we're not seeing that, but that's always a good thing to know. So now let's check this out. If you go to 6504, you'll see that there is a way to look at telemetry. So we just reloaded the page, and now if we go to this OTel test viewer, we can see we're getting a bunch of traces from development. The most interesting one is getting the home page, and you can see we got this nice little waterfall diagram of like everything that happened, all the Flex components, all the SQL that was run, everything that happened when this home page was rendered. And it tries to join up stuff from the browser. So you can see the browser document load event, and if we scroll up, we can see all of the different browser events that happened during the rendering of the page. And that's kind of handy for getting just a sense of like what is happening with your app. So I hope you enjoyed this tour. I hope you use Brut to make some awesome web apps. Please check us out at BrutRB.com.